U.S. history students. This week, your teachers may be out for Keystone testing to help you get through Tuesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week, May 13th, 14th, and 15th. We've done a series of videos to help you through each day and the work that you need to do. Mrs. Thomas, myself, Mrs. Whitmoyer, and Mrs. Force are all out for Keystone testing. Yesterday, you guys were working on the lesson 6.02 Reaganomics, and you had a checkpoint to complete. We're going to be picking up for the May 14th recording, this recording, with lesson 6.03 Cold War Warriors. This lesson includes pages 904 to 912. You do have a checkpoint for your graded assignment for today, and you will have some lesson slides to go through. We're going to take you through this lesson step by step, make sure you know what to read, and give you a little bit of a summary of what you're going to see here. To begin your lesson, what you're going to want to do is go to the Unit 6 tab and click on your lesson Cold War Warriors. Once you've clicked upon it, you're going to see the summary given about this lesson. It's going to tell you a little bit about what you're going to read and give you some goals for this lesson. You guys are familiar with these from our live sessions. The goals for 603 are to recognize examples of protest against communism in the Soviet Union and its satellite countries. Satellite countries means the surrounding countries that they controlled. The second goal is to describe Reagan's weapons and strategies to describe Reagan's weapons strategy and its results. He had a weapon strategy system that he was trying to put in place called the Strategic Defense System. The third goal is distinguish between traditional views of the Cold War and Reagan's views. Reagan had a very different approach to the Cold War than previous presidents, and it resulted in a very different turn of events, which eventually led to the end of the Cold War. You're going to be reading again pages 904 to 912. You do have a reading guide. Before you go into your course and begin reading, you need to go to slide 3. Make sure that you print this off, either print it off or access and save this document so that you can type in your responses and have that information ready to help you with your checkpoint. The reading guides are extremely helpful. They're always used heavily to prepare you for a checkpoint or a quiz. That's what the checkpoints and quizzes are based on. You can also complete 2 of these per unit to get some extra credit. In this lesson, you also have a activity here called Cold War Warriors. If you click on this link, it will open up an activity for you that you can complete to help you practice remembering the involvement of these Cold War leaders and how they helped to bring about the end of the Cold War. It's like a matching activity and timeline. Again, your checkpoint is at the end. That is your graded assignment. If you click on the checkpoint and enter it, well, you shouldn't enter it until you're ready to take it, but you will see, and you can pause the recording here to get an idea of what your questions will be. You'll have 2 questions that you can answer after completing your reading guide. Okay, one is on Central America and the involvement of the U.S. In trying to combat communism, and the second one is on how Gorbachev and Reagan changed the relationship between their 2 countries, the Soviet Union and America, during this time period. All right, so let's take a look at our actual reading for today's lesson. Again, before you start reading, what you need to be doing is making sure that your reading guide is out and you're answering those questions as you go. When Reagan came into the presidency, he had a very specific and different goal than previous presidents. A lot of previous presidents thought that the Cold War would just simply continue, that as long as the Soviet Union existed, there would be tension between the 2 world powers. But Reagan didn't believe this. His philosophy was we win and they lose. His idea was that the Soviet Union was never equal to the United States. It is not equal to the United States. And that simply through outspending them and outmaneuvering them militarily, that they would just simply not be able to compete with the United States. The United States had a lot more resources, money, time, and energy to spend combating the Cold War and would win. That was his strategy. He also knew, Reagan did, that there was a lot of unrest or a lot of unhappy people behind the Iron Curtain. The Iron Curtain is that term that Winston Churchill used after World War II to describe any of the territories being controlled by communism within the Soviet bloc or the Eastern Bloc. All this unrest led to several distinguished leaders or rebels, if you will, who were speaking out against the communism in the Soviet Union. One of them was Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a writer who went to prison for speaking out or writing against the government. And his writings actually leaked out to the rest of Eastern Europe and became quite an inspiration to others who were not happy in communist in the communist Soviet Union. In addition to him, Andrei Sarkihov was a well-known scientist who actually helped the Soviet Union develop the atomic bomb, but he knew the atomic bomb was very dangerous and did not support its development or the arms race. Because of his views against the direction the Soviet Union was taken, he was actually put under house arrest and his life basically restricted completely. His writings and his protests were also leaked out to many readers around the world and got a lot of people very interested in fighting back against the Soviet oppression that they were experiencing. These leaders who were trying to bring an end to communism weren't just private citizens, they weren't just scientists and writers, they were also religious leaders. Pope John Paul II was rose to the papacy as head of the Catholic Church and would make would make a trip, more than a week-long trip, to his native homeland Poland, which was behind the Iron Curtain. It was a communist country. When he went there, he urged people to assert their rights to have religion, to practice religion, which was not permitted in communist areas. Communism is a secular government. They do not approve of any other religion or any other devotion than to the state. So Pope John Paul II was considered yet another leader against communism during this time. You will read in this portion, taking aim at the evil empire, that Reagan was very direct in his policies in fighting communism. He had a very strong rhetoric, meaning he had very strong speech against communism. He didn't pull any punches. He called them evil, said that they would be defeated, and everybody knew where he stood on communism. In order to do this, he had to do much the same thing that previous presidents did, like Eisenhower and Johnson and Nixon, even Kennedy, in going into places around the world where communism was spreading and doing their best to stop it. In fact, this has come back to haunt the United States many a time, including for reasons that we were involved in Afghanistan. Okay, so the U.S. actually ends up supporting they end up supporting the Mujahideen organization, which was fighting communism in Afghanistan. What that resulted in was eventually the Taliban taking over when the Soviet Union left that area. It was basically the communists versus the Mujahideen in that area. And when the Soviets left because they lost, the Taliban seized power, and we are now currently fighting the Taliban. So the side that we started supporting ends up being the side that we have given support to, or our arms and money ended up finding its way into the hands of the Taliban, who we are now fighting in Afghanistan. The Reagan Doctrine is what becomes known as Reagan's policy of getting involved anywhere in the world where communism was spreading. This didn't just happen in Afghanistan, it happened in Central America as well. And here is the example, an example of a map that shows you where the United States was becoming involved in combating communism in Latin America. It was all over the place. Most notably, the United States got involved in Nicaragua, where the president gave money and arms, uh, military equipment to uh, what was a military force fighting the communists. Now, just because they're not communists doesn't mean necessarily that they are good people. Most of uh, Reagan's, I guess, opponents would tell you that the Contras, this group that was against the communists in Nicaragua, were just as dangerous, if not more so. So the president didn't really care who he was supporting in these efforts. He just cared that they were not communist and would give them the aid that they needed in order to prevent communism from spreading. So there were many situations in which the United States were supporting questionable people and questionable sides as a result of just, desperately trying to keep communism from spreading. The other thing that Reagan did that you'll read about in this section called a new military strategy was to try to develop a defense system. He called it the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. The Strategic Defense Initiative became known or nicknamed Star Wars because its idea was to create a system using satellites in space to knock down any nuclear weapons. We didn't have this kind of technology at the time. The idea was to throw a bunch of money at research and development and create such a system in order to protect the United States from nuclear attack. Now, the Soviet Union, now under new leadership under Mikhail Gorbachev, did not have the money to combat or to compete with something like the SDI, which became known as Star Wars. They couldn't compete with that. In fact, this new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, wasn't looking to compete. He openly admitted to the world that the Soviet Union did not have the money, they didn't have the resources, that their government was falling apart, and the only options he felt that his country had was to reform and to change its ways. That was the only way it could survive. So he instituted two separate political ideas. One was perestroika, the idea of restructuring the government not to be so militarily dependent and to change its focus and scale back military efforts. And glasnost, the idea of being open. Okay, it was called openness. Stopping censorship and allowing their people to live and talk freely. This was a big change, and over time, Gorbachev and Reagan would agree to start scaling back their arms race. And Reagan would publicly challenge Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall in his very famous speech, which part of it is included here in your textbook. So you'll want to read this through as a primary resource. So you can see in this lesson that you're reading about the Cold War policies of Reagan, who his partners were in creating a political team, you could say, against communism, along with British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and other leaders around the world taking a stand against communism. The amount of money he was willing to throw at it and the attention and focus he was willing to throw at it eventually would bring an end to the Cold War. Your next lesson will actually pick up after this point. It ends here on 9:12, so use the information here to assist you in finishing the lesson. After you've read this portion and you have completed your reading guide, you're going to go to the checkpoint that you see here, 603, and answer these two questions. Okay, and that will be the end of your lesson. If you have any questions while your teachers are out, make sure you send them a K-mail. Please remember they are not in the office. There is likely to be a delay in both grading and response to your questions, but they will get to you as soon as they can. Good luck on your lesson today.